Jake Malone had an arrogant smile plastered on his face as he rode through the gate of the most prosperous ranch in all of Texas. At 32 years old, this gruff cowboy believed he'd already tamed the wildest horses, conquered the most difficult women, and faced down the toughest men in the state. His reputation as untamable swept across the arid lands like wind through the desert. But on that scorching hot day, Jake was about to discover that there's something far more powerful than muscles, battle scars, and a reputation built in dusty saloons. Something that would make his pride crumble like a sandcastle under a storm. The Ironheart Ranch didn't have that name by accident. 15,000 acres of fertile land, 2,000 head of cattle, a dozen purebred horses, and a colonial house that looked like it came straight out of an old movie. All of it belonged to a single person. When Jake heard that the owner was hiring, he laughed. "Work for a woman, never," he declared to his friends at the saloon. But his gambling debts said otherwise. He needed that job, even if it wounded his machismo pride. What Jake didn't imagine was that this 88-year-old woman, with steel eyes and hands calloused from 6 decades of work, was about to teach him lessons that no man ever could. And the first one would begin before he even dismounted from his horse. Jake tied his horse at the corral and walked with long strides toward the porch of the main house. His boots kicked up small clouds of red dust with each determined step. He mentally rehearsed the confident speech he'd use to get the job, even if he had to work for a woman. The door opened before he even climbed the steps. There she was. Donna Marlene wore a simple cotton dress, an apron with dirt and mud stains, and had her grey hair pulled back in a low bun. But it was her eyes that captured all attention. Deep brown, piercing like those of a hawk analyzing its prey. "You must be that Jake Malone," she said without smiling, crossing her arms over her chest. Her voice had that metallic quality of someone not accustomed to being contradicted. "You arrived 2 hours late and don't even apologize. Interesting start." Jake felt the blood rush to his face. He wasn't late, or was he? Actually, he had stopped along the way to have a beer and chat with some friends. But how did she know? "With all due respect, ma'am, With all due respect?" Marlene interrupted him with a dry laugh. "Boy, when someone starts a sentence like that, it usually means they're about to say something completely disrespectful. Spare me the theater. Do you need this job or not?" No one had spoken to Jake like that in years. His first reaction was to turn around and leave. Who did this old woman think she was to treat him that way? But then he remembered the accumulated bills, the loan shark's threats, the empty pantry in his miserable cabin. He swallowed his pride like it was ground glass. "I need it, ma'am." The words came out through clenched teeth. "Excellent. So here are the rules," said Marlene, descending the steps and standing face to face with him, even though she was 6 inches shorter. "First, nobody bosses anybody around here. Everyone works together. Second, I don't tolerate drinking during work hours. Third, your opinions about what women can or can't do stay stuck in your throat. And fourth, if you're half the cowboy you claim to be, you'll prove it with work, not words." Jake clenched his fists. Part of him wanted to argue each of those rules. Another part, the hungry and desperate part, simply nodded. "Understood." "You don't understand anything yet," said Marlene, turning to walk toward the stables. "But you will. Come on, I'll show you what real work is." The rest of that morning was a blur of activities that Jake thought he'd mastered, but under Marlene's critical eye proved to be full of flaws. He shod horses the wrong way, fixed fences without proper technique. Even his lassoing style was questioned and corrected by this woman who, at 88 years old, demonstrated techniques he'd never seen before. The humiliation burned hotter than the midday sun on his sweaty back. But something even more disconcerting was happening. Jake was learning, and for the first time in a long while, feeling truly challenged. On the 3rd day of work, Jake made a mistake that almost cost dearly. Trying to impress the other ranch hands, he decided to break a particularly nervous colt by himself. The animal was young, scared, and unpredictable. Exactly the type of horse that requires patience and technique, not brute force and inflated ego. Jake entered the corral with that arrogant confidence that had always worked as a mask for his insecurity. The other workers watched from a distance, some rooting for him, others waiting for the imminent disaster. The colt danced nervously, ears back, eyes wide, showing the whites around them. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, approaching with the rope. "I'm going to show you who's boss here." It was at that exact moment that Donna Marlene appeared, walking across the yard with that presence that seemed to expand the very air around her. "Jake Malone, get out of that corral right now!" "I can handle this, ma'am," Jake shouted back, irritated at being treated like a child in front of everyone. "It's not about whether you can, it's about whether you should." Marlene's voice cut through the air like a whip. "That animal is afraid. It doesn't need to be broken by force. It needs to learn to trust." "I know what I'm doing," Jake insisted, turning toward the colt, and it was exactly in that split second of distraction that the horse charged. Powerful kicks flew through the air, one of them passing inches from Jake's face as he fell backwards into the dust. In a surprisingly agile movement for someone her age, Marlene jumped the fence and placed herself between Jake and the frightened animal. She didn't shout, didn't make sudden moves, just started singing softly, an old gentle melody that Jake had never heard. The colt stopped immediately, its ears swiveled forward, focused on that calm voice. Marlene extended her hand slowly, still singing, and the animal approached cautiously. In less than 2 minutes, the horse Jake couldn't control was eating peacefully from the palm of that 88-year-old woman's hand. Jake sat in the dust, stunned, not just from the near tragedy, but from what he'd just witnessed. His whole life he'd learned that dominating was about strength, about showing who's strongest. But here was living proof that there was another way. "Get up," said Marlene when the colt was already calm. "Not to prove something to me or the others. Get up because you need to learn that strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen." The other ranch hands had watched everything in silence. None of them laughed or mocked. They'd all been through their own lessons with Donna Marlene. They knew that moment wasn't about humiliation, but about transformation. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Lying in his simple bed in the workers' quarters, he replayed the scene over and over. How was it possible for an elderly woman to make something look so easy that he couldn't do? And more importantly, how many other things in his life had he tried to solve with force when he should have used intelligence? "You're asking yourself the right questions," said Marlene the next morning when Jake appeared with deep dark circles. She was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the entire crew, a tradition she'd maintained since taking over the ranch decades ago. "I can see it in your eyes. Welcome to the beginning of your real education, Cowboy." A week after the incident with the colt, Marlene invited Jake for coffee on the porch after dinner. The sky was painted orange and purple, and the air was finally starting to cool after another scorching day. Jake accepted nervously, uncertain what to expect. "You want to know how I got all this, don't you?" Marlene asked, pouring strong coffee into 2 metal mugs, dented by time. "I can see the curiosity battling with your pride every time you look at me." Jake didn't deny it. In recent weeks, that question had consumed him. How did a woman, a widow for over 50 years at that, manage to not only maintain but expand the largest ranch in the region? "My husband died when I was 35, Marlene began, looking at the horizon as if she could see the past unfolding before her eyes. "A stupid accident with an angry bull. Left me with 2 small children, enormous debts, and a ranch that everyone said I should sell." "Why didn't you sell?" Jake asked, genuinely curious now. "Because selling was what they expected me to do. It was what a poor widow should do." Marlene smiled bitterly. "But I wasn't poor and I wasn't weak. I was furious. furious with a world that thought I couldn't do it, that I needed a man to save me, that my only value was in being someone's wife. Jake took a sip of the bitter coffee, remembering all the times he'd made exactly those assumptions about women in his life. The shame burned hotter than the hot beverage. In the first year, I lost almost everything, Marlene continued. Not because I was incompetent, but because nobody wanted to do business with me. Banks denied loans, suppliers charged double, buyers offered half price for my cattle. That's when I learned the most important lesson. I don't need them to like me. I just need them to respect me. And how did you achieve that? Jake was completely absorbed now. By being impeccable in everything. Paying debts before they were due. Keeping my cattle healthier than any male ranchers in the region. Treating my employees with dignity so they'd work better than any crew out there. In 5 years, the same men who laughed at me were coming to ask for advice. Marlene looked directly into Jake's eyes. You know what the difference is between real power and fake power, boy. Fake power needs to shout, threaten, diminish others to feel big. Real power is quiet, it's consistent, it's built brick by brick with work and integrity. Those words pierced Jake like accurate arrows. How many times had he shouted in bars to prove he was a man? How many idiotic fights did he start just to show that nobody messed with him? All that behavior was just the fragile mask of a man who, deep down, didn't truly feel powerful. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked, his voice choked with emotions he barely knew how to name. "Because you remind me of my oldest son," Marlene responded softly. "He was also proud, stubborn, thought strength was everything, until life taught him differently. Unfortunately, he learned too late, after losing his wife and children for not knowing how to be gentle when necessary." The silence that followed was filled only by the sounds of the night in the countryside, crickets singing, wind whispering in the trees, cattle moving lazily in the distant pasture. Jake felt something breaking inside him, some wall he'd kept erected for so long he didn't even remember when he'd built it. "I don't want to be like this forever," he confessed, surprising himself with the vulnerability. "But I don't know how to be different. I don't know how." Marlene placed her calloused hand over Jake's. "Change doesn't happen all at once, boy. It happens choice by choice, day after day, and you've already taken the first step, admitting you need to change. Now comes the hard part, doing the work." 3 months had passed since Jake started working at Ironheart Ranch. 3 months that felt like a lifetime, such were the transformations happening inside him. The other ranch hands noticed the change. Jake drank less, fought less, listened more. But the real test was still to come. It was on an October afternoon, when the heat gave a reprieve and the sky threatened rain, that 3 men showed up at the ranch. Jake recognized them immediately. They were henchmen of Victor Drummond, the richest and cruelest rancher in the region. Victor had been trying to buy Marlene's land for years and didn't accept no for an answer. "Is Donna Marlene here?" the group's leader asked with a fake smile. He was a large man with scars on his face and a gun hanging from his belt ostentatiously. "Depends on what you want," Jake responded, positioning himself between them and the house. His old instinct screamed to resolve this with violence, but Marlene's voice in his head whispered, "Strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen." Mr. Drummond made a generous offer for the ranch. We came to get the final answer. She already answered. The answer is no. It's always been no. It'll always be no. Jake kept his voice firm, but controlled. "I wasn't talking to you, cowboy." The man took a threatening step forward. "Get out of the way before you get hurt." That's when Marlene came out of the house, a shotgun broken over her arm casually. It wasn't pointed at anyone, but the message was clear. "Gentlemen, I believe you're lost. My land is not for sale. It wasn't yesterday, it's not today, it won't be tomorrow." "Ma'am, you're getting old." The leader tried to sound reasonable. "Wouldn't it be wiser to sell while you can and enjoy your last years in peace?" My last years? Marlene laughed, a humorless sound. Boy, I've buried men younger and stronger than you. And about peace, I'm much more at peace knowing that men like your boss don't get their dirty hands on what I built. The tension in the air was palpable. Jake could feel the situation on the verge of exploding. The three men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting resistance. One of them started moving his hand toward his weapon. "I wouldn't do that," said a voice behind them. It was Miguel, the ranch's oldest foreman, along with 5 other ranch hands, all armed, all loyal to Donna Marlene. "It's 3 against 7, and you're on private property. By law, we have every right to defend ourselves." The group's leader assessed the situation. Numbers didn't favor them. Tactical advantage didn't either. He raised his hand slowly. All right. We were just delivering a message. We don't want trouble." "Then go back and tell your boss," Marlene advanced a few steps, "that if he sends anyone here again, they won't be received with words. They'll be received with the sheriff and a formal complaint for intimidation. Are we understood?" The 3 men backed toward their horses, wounded pride visible in every tense movement. They mounted and left at a gallop, raising clouds of red dust. Only when they disappeared on the horizon did Jake realize he was trembling, not from fear, but from contained adrenaline. "You did well," Marlene said, lowering the shotgun. 3 months ago, you would have gone for a fight without thinking. Today, you thought first. That's growth. "I wanted to hit them," Jake admitted. "I really wanted to." "Of course you did. I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm teaching you to choose when to fight and when to use your head." Marlene smiled for the first time that day, because true courage isn't never being afraid or angry. It's feeling those things and still choosing the wiser path. That night, the ranch hands celebrated the victory with a barbecue. Stories were told, laughter echoed under the starry sky. Jake watched Marlene sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and respected her. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because she earned it by being exactly who she was. And for the first time in his adult life, Jake understood what he truly wanted. Not to be feared, but respected. Not to have power over others, but power over himself. Not to be alone at the top of a mountain of ego, but surrounded by people who chose to be by his side. Winter arrived gently that year, bringing cold mornings and pleasant afternoons. Jake was completing 6 months working at Ironheart Ranch, but he felt like he'd lived a lifetime in that period. Each day brought new lessons, not just about working in the field, but about how to be a better human being. One morning, Marlene called him for a ride. It wasn't uncommon for her to do this with her employees. They were moments of conversation, teaching, connection. But this time there was something different in her eyes, a seriousness Jake couldn't decipher. They rode in silence for almost an hour until they reached the highest point on the property. From there, they could see the entire extension of Ironheart Ranch. The green pastures, the river winding through the lands, the cattle grazing peacefully, the colonial house that had withstood half a century of hardships. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marlene said, and there was a melancholy in her voice Jake had never heard before. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Jake responded honestly. "And I'm not just talking about the land." Marlene smiled. "Jake, I need to tell you something. I went to the doctor in town last week. The heart is failing. They gave me 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky." The world seemed to stop. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "No, there has to be something they can do, some treatment, some surgery." "I'm 88 years old, boy. I've lived longer than I deserved, done more than I expected. I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of leaving all this without someone to care for it properly." She looked directly at him. "That's why I spent these months watching you, testing you, teaching you. I don't understand. My children don't want the ranch. One lives in the big city, he's a lawyer and thinks rural life is primitive. The other has lived in Europe for 20 years and barely remembers what living here is like. The grandchildren don't even mention them. Marlene took a deep breath. But you arrived here a broken man pretending to be strong, and you're becoming a truly strong man by learning to be vulnerable. Jake felt tears burning his eyes, something that hadn't happened since childhood. Donna Marlene, I don't deserve... Nobody deserves anything, Jake. It's not about deserving. It's about being willing to do the work, to maintain the legacy, to treat these lands and these people with the same respect I had for 53 years. She took an envelope from her pocket. My will is already done. Half the ranch goes to my children. They can do whatever they want with their part. The other half stays with you, with one condition. Any condition, ma'am. Any. That you keep learning, keep growing, keep being better today than you were yesterday. Marlene held Jake's hand with surprising strength. And when you find someone lost like you were, when you find someone who needs a chance, you give them that chance. You teach like I've been teaching you. You pass forward what you received. Jake couldn't contain his tears. They ran free down his face as he hugged that extraordinary woman who, in just 6 months, had done for him what years of life couldn't, show him who he could be. I promise, he whispered. I promise to honor everything you taught me. The following months were precious and painful. Marlene continued working as much as she could, teaching Jake not just about ranch management, but about dealing with people, resolving conflicts, making difficult decisions. Each conversation was a lesson, each moment together a gift Jake kept in his heart like treasure. When Marlene finally passed on a quiet spring morning, Jake was by her side. She died as she lived, with dignity, strength, and surrounded by love. The funeral was the largest the region had ever seen. Hundreds of people came to pay tribute to the woman who had touched so many lives. Jake took over the ranch with fear and determination in equal measure. But he wasn't alone. Miguel and the other ranch hands were there, as was the community Marlene had built over decades. And in his heart, he carried every lesson, every word, every example from that extraordinary woman. The first thing Jake did was put up a sign at the ranch entrance. He kept the name Ironheart, but added a phrase below, where strength meets wisdom and pride transforms into respect. Because that's what Marlene had taught him. Not that strength didn't matter, but that without wisdom, without empathy, without the courage to be vulnerable, strength was just violence waiting to happen. And Jake was determined to live and teach these lessons for the rest of his life. The story of Jake and Donna Marlene isn't just about a cowboy and a rancher. It's about all of us who at some point need to unlearn to truly learn. How many times have you caught yourself fighting against life using force when you should use intelligence? How many growth opportunities have you missed because your pride spoke louder than your wisdom? True power isn't in dominating others, but in mastering yourself. It's not in never falling, but in rising different from how you fell. Marlene, at 88 years old, proved that age is just a number when you have purpose, wisdom, and courage to be authentic. She built an empire not with arrogance, but with consistency, not with shouts, but with actions that spoke louder than words. Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who completely transformed your worldview? Someone who taught you that true power comes from unexpected places? Share your story so that other people who haven't learned this lesson yet can be inspired. And if this narrative touched your heart, if you saw a bit of yourself in Jake or admired Marlene's strength, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, because the best lessons are those we pass forward. I'll see you in the next video with more stories that will transform how you see life.